Ling asked me to do some guidance around an attunement today, and the invitation is that all of us sitting in this room have probably lost something. And what I would like to invite you to be with, it's not what you have lost, but what have you gained in the last year? What has entered into your life in the last year that has been welcome, that has brought joy, that has given you a different path or a different way? And I'm inviting Joel experience right now that only invite that which feels okay for you to invite in terms of what brought you joy throughout this year. And just notice that as you keep that peace company. Yeah, yeah. Just notice that. And I'm not going to ask anybody to share anything, but I am going to read a poem that probably people are sick and tired of hearing. Think it's appropriate for today. And it's Ling Unger, Pandemic. What if you thought of it as the Jewish consider the Sabbath, the most sacred of times? Cease from travel, cease from buying and selling. Give up just for now on trying to make the world different than it is. Sing, pray, touch only those to whom you commit your life. Center down. And when your body has become still, reach out with your heart. Know that we are connected in ways that are terrifying and beautiful. You can hardly deny it now. Know that our lives are in one another's hand. Surely that has come clear. Do not reach out your hands, reach out your heart, reach out your words, reach out all of the tenders and compassion that move invisibly where we cannot touch. Promise this word your love, for better or for worse, in sickness and in health, so long as we all shall live. And maybe we can take a breath together, all of us, as one unit. Just allow that breath to permeate every place of the body that needs to be restored and that sits here in this moment. And that for the next few hours that we're together, that whatever needs to be set aside so you can be present here, it's set aside and not forgotten, but just give you the gift of time to be present in this moment.
Thank you so much, Isabel. That was a lovely crossing from our sort of pre-meeting, conversation to our meeting and centering and being with each other. Tonight we're going to take a step, and I'm excited about it. I'm quite excited about it. Focusing is a wonderful way of bringing the big larger systems that we're embedded in and the deeply personal together. And we're hoping in our session tonight, we'll be able to bring our very personal selves and also the larger cultural systems that we're embedded in together. I'm also particularly enjoying the idea of bringing um, the the practice from the 70s that I loved, that changed the world, I believe, the consciousness raising practices into our session and giving you a taste of them. So before we do that, before we really get into the teaching and then get into the heart of it, I just want to play a little piece of what Miko said. It wasn't last time, but the time before. And she asked a very profound question that we're going to be trying to begin to answer tonight about community empowerment. How do we acknowledge the context that we are community in? How do we acknowledge the power dynamics, all of the unseen forces? So we're just going to play that little piece that, with Miko's permission that she gave us, and then we'll just see what that brings. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about what focusing can bring us to help us with this very important and very complex and mystifying sometimes challenge of having community empowerment, the individual within the context of the cultural systems that we're embedded in.
Kind of holding two things here. I think the first around the structure. I think I'm someone for whom, in trying to figure this out, I think when we had our focusing conversation, Lynn, I talked about, my baby deer legs, that I feel like in this community space, trying to do the focusing dynamic, I feel like I'm walking on my baby deer legs because I'm used to focusing as a one-way, not a one-way exchange, but there's primarily one person who's, doing the focusing, the other person's listening. So doing it in a community context feels new. And so there are ways that it felt like the structure would be facilitative until you have an embodied understanding of how we do this, right? Just like with focusing, we know the steps, but then you get to a point where it's just embodied and you know it. And so I think that's how I kind of think of, some of this structure here. Is there a way that we can kind of identify a structure that might kind of just facilitate the process, but we ultimately get to this embodied sense of like, oh, we realize that this is what works for us. And of course, also, as we talked about, and part of it being we're not rigid with the structure. We use it when it's helpful and then release it when it's not, and improvise and lean into what's surfacing in the moment. So that's the one thing. So I'm going to pause there. And then with the second thing, I think kind of going back to Avril's first point, which I think is something that I've just always been holding in this space and think of whenever there are these community groups, is that particularly when you're talking about community and you're talking about empowerment and thinking of Jean Genlin's, focusing needs a structured political consciousness. When I think about community, I wonder about how you create a container that recognizes the context where there are differences in social power and privilege that might shape that interaction. And for example, in graduate school, I was in a class about power. That was the topic, was power. And I was the only person of color in that class, the only one. And at the end of the class, the instructor reached out to me about why, knowing in some other classes I had been more active, but why in that class in particular, my participation was different. And I mentioned, I think there needs to be some type of awareness of what it means for only one person of color to be in a class with all these other white people in a conversation about power and what that means, right? So just kind of, I just wonder, what does that mean when we come in, recognizing that though we are this community here, that there's a larger context and history that still shapes this interaction.
Yes, there's a history and a context, Miko is saying, that is shaping this interaction. Wow, how is that history, those power dynamics, that context shaping our interaction and shaping it in ways that we don't even know that it's shaping it? What are these shaping forces that we are embedded in? So I just wondered when you heard me go saying that, and I know that struck you before, and that metaphor of us walking on our deer legs to find out how focusing can help us with these issues. You know, how did it strike you this time to hear what Miko said, and what did it bring for you? And we'll only have time for a few comments, and then I'll make some remarks about how focusing can help with this, and then we'll go from there.
I was struck by the two things coming together. The first was about a flexible structure, and then the second one was about shaping. And those words are kind of similar in a way.
Those point about needing a structure to walk on our deer legs until we are comfortable with the territory, and also about how we're being shaped by the context, the history, and the political, social, ethnic, racial, economic, all of those systems that without our knowing. Anybody else, just whatever came to you hearing Miko?
So I've been thinking about how, Lynn, you've talked about sharing leadership, or, you know, sort of, I'm not sure exactly how you put it, but, you know, we had Joe on doing the Braver Angels, which was wonderful to learn about that, and very helpful. And what comes up for me is my stepmother teaches social permaculture, and she wrote a book called The Group Empowerment Manual. And so it's normally we have hierarchies. Okay, so here we have the teacher, and or then we have the CEOs, and then the higher ups, and then the minions. And she's offering charts that is a very different way of sharing power, and I think this might be specifically interesting for the group. And I see Miko nodding because I feel like she probably either knows about it or would like it.
I think we're talking about different levels here. The level of how we are trying to create a culture here that where we're sharing leadership, sharing power, receiving everybody's voice, making room for everybody. And we're talking about these cultural structures that we're part of, that we are interaction with, that that are here because they're part of everything, and shaping our interaction. So we're talking about both of these together.
Just very briefly, I think the part that made me curious and interested, and perhaps a bit anxious, is the part about looking at and talking about power dynamics that are part of the structures that we're embedded in, and perhaps not knowing and not being aware of. Mm-hmm. So that, I think that was the part that, you know, that spoke to me most.
What was scary about that?
I don't know. I haven't gone far enough in there. Uh-huh. Probably more like perhaps a fear of being embarrassed or something like that, by, not being aware kind of thing. And that as the conversation moves, if the conversation moves forward in those kinds of ways, or there's an anticipated perhaps that as I learn more, I might be embarrassed for having to learn more. So I think that's what is there in some way.
When you said that, I had this sort of felt shift of, oh, of course that's there. Our fear of being embarrassed at not knowing some of the ways that cultural dynamics are shaping us.
Mm-hmm.
Sort of being caught there and then feeling like, oh, what's wrong with me? I didn't know that.
That kind of thing, yeah.
I remember when we had our in-person training, and we introduced the idea of people going around and introducing themselves with their pronouns. And some people saying, well, what does that mean? Why would you use it? I mean, a pronoun is a pronoun. Why would you do that? And then when the discussion about introducing myself as going by she, her, was sort of expressed, some of the people who had never heard of that felt so embarrassed, like, what's wrong with me? Or I don't know that. There's that feeling of being taken off guard, right? Does anybody else have anything like that?
I don't really care anymore because I've been embarrassed so many times.
Well, you're very brave, Monica.
I was very embarrassed. I was more embarrassed when I was 26 and I was first with Alvin, who was Nina Simone's music director, and he would point things out to me and it would throw me into shame, about racist things. And so I was well initiated, and I want to say I got over it, but like I got past my shame and said, oh, wow, I don't know, and learned some stuff. And now people, of course, still point things out to me, like very recently at a group of Gen Zs, I found out like they were, all of the girls, like all of them were bisexual, not just like one. And I was like, oh my God, I'm the grandma in the room, like completely clueless. And I don't think I really felt shame. I was just sort of laughing at myself, but I really, really understand others who would feel shame around that. I do.
Is there anybody else that wants to comment about that fear, the one fear that Steve talked about of being embarrassed? Is there any other fears of taking our dear legs into the territory of cultural embeddedness and power dynamics? And
I relate to D'Amico's dear legs, that I realized that I grew up in a time of not only children should not be heard, but girls should not be heard. And girls were not, even if they wanted to, weren't given the acknowledgement that what they had to say was really worth the air that they took up to say it. And it's lasted with me for a long time. So it's really, it takes a big sort of, okay, here we go. It's like plunging, from the high dive each time I speak up.
I'm so glad you're speaking up, and you're speaking up more and more. And yes, that time of girls should be seen and not heard. That I saw on PBS, and some of you might really enjoy this, a documentary called 9 to 5 about that organization and that movie 9 to 5, and the time when women were seen as either servants and mothers in the workforce. So you might enjoy that.
I used to correct my husband when he talked about the people who worked, the assistants and secretarial staff, I guess, in the office, and he'd refer to them as girls. This is back in the 70s.
Yes.
And he kept doing it, I guess. And I'd say, how old is whatever her name was? You know, she's 45, whatever. And I said, I don't think she's a girl, you know.
Right, right. Well, there's a lot more to say about this, and we will have more time to discuss. But I'm just going to say a few things for background for this discussion.